I welcome everyone to the second video today. I hope you liked the first theme of the video and you will appreciate the second. Do not forget to like and subscribe to the channel. This is very important to me. I will not detain you. Let's start. Story 1 from user deleted. Probably too late to the party, but I had a lady come into the ER listed as multiple medical problems. This usually means diabetes and the issues stemming from it, or maybe bleeding issues from another disease, or maybe odd blood tests results at a clinic. I hadn't seen the patient yet, but the doctor came to the nurse's station asking who had room 15. I jumped up and followed him into the room. I walked in and saw what I thought was a corpse. Then the patient's eye swiveled over to look at me. She truly looked like one of the people they found in a concentration camp. I could see every bone and her body was twisted in a decorticate position with her jaw locked open. Then the smell hit me. Rotting flesh, death, and body fluids. I struggled to keep a neutral face and not gag. I tried to place a blood pressure cuff on her arm, and her skin just started flaking off in my hands. I gagged. The doctor started removing her clothes to examine her. Her feet were black to the ankles. Her hip bones were poking through her skin and were black. The skin around her ribs was worn away to oozing muscle fibers. Her calves were incredibly swollen, and the skin was splitting like ripped pants. I removed her depends, and there was feces coating her entire genital area. Then the doctor went to remove a large bandage on her lower back. Her entire sacrum was exposed, and the bones were black. The skin around it was a black liquefied mass. It smelled like nothing I've ever smelled. I can't even describe it. The doctor told her family I would clean up her ulcers and wounds in preparation for surgery. Liar. No surgeon would operate on her. I had no idea how to clean dead bone tissue and liquefied skin. They don't cover that in nursing school. When I went to clean her sacral area, all the liquefied skin separated and oozed all over the bed. I really struggled to keep my trash together. Afterwards, I needed a moment in the supply closet to cry it out for a second. I had no idea the human body could break down so much without dying. I still think about that woman sometimes and what led to her living like that. It still breaks my heart. Story 2 from user deleted. As a new nurse, I worked on a nephrology unit, which meant that we dealt with mostly patients who had kidney failure and needed hemodialysis 3 times a week to clean their blood. A patient was admitted through the emergency room and told me that he hadn't been to dialysis in 4 weeks. He had HIV, kidney failure, had lost custody of his kids after a messy divorce, and had no will to live. He planned to just stay in his home until he died. He probably wasn't far from it, but a neighbor who hadn't seen him for a few weeks peeked in the window and saw him sitting, unresponsive, on the couch. They called 911 and he was brought to my hospital. 3 weeks is an insanely long time to go without dialysis. Dialysis removes toxins and excess fluid from your blood. Missing a session can leave you feeling sick and swollen. Missing 12 sessions can kill you. This guy was so swollen. I've never seen a person who was so full of fluid. He looked like that girl from Willy Wonka that turned into a blueberry. His feet and ankles were particularly massive. I wasn't sure that he'd live. Miraculously, after several dialysis sessions, he'd fully deflated. However, he was left with lots of loose skin afterwards, which had the fragile texture of an old balloon. One night, he called me to his room and said, "I think my foot is bleeding." He was right. He'd slid down towards the bottom of his bed and used his legs to push himself back up towards the top. In doing so, the fragile skin on the bottoms of his feet had been totally sheared away, leaving only tissue and bone and so much blood. I had no idea what to do, so I just called a code blue. The patient wasn't dead or dying, but no part of nursing school or practice had prepared me for an HIV+ patient who had ripped the soles of his feet off and was currently laying in a 3-foot-wide, rapidly expanding puddle of blood. I just needed to get a whole bunch of people to the room as quickly as possible. I threw on a waterproof gown and some gloves and held pressure on the bottoms of his feet with a towel until help arrived. They didn't know what to do either. We called in the general surgeon, who seemed to think we might be exaggerating the extent of the damage and blood loss. He told us he'd be there in an hour and just to hold pressure until it stopped bleeding. We soaked towel after towel until finally the surgeon shows up. He breezes into the room, moves my towel away and says, Then he reaches towards the patient's foot and pulls off a huge, softball-sized blood clot. In that moment, time stopped. He held out his hand, holding the huge clot. And I, without really thinking about what I was doing, held my hand out too. He plopped the clot right into my outstretched hand. In the next moments, several things happened all at once. I realized I was holding a big, coagulated mass of blood. I started dry heaving. I dropped it on the floor. It splattered. The surgeon exclaims, "Oh Jesus," not in response to my gags or the fact that he was just splattered by the clot I dropped, but because the patient's foot is now profusely bleeding again. He darts off and tells us to get the patient down to the OR immediately. We get him down there, and on the way back, realize that he'd left a trail of blood down the hallways, into the elevator, and to the operating theater. I saw the patient during my next shift, and he jokes, "I thought you were going to pass out when the doctor handed you that mess." To which I replied, "Sir, I was positive that you were about to bleed to death." Story 3 from user the Mr. Ogre. Happened to me, not a medical professional. Friend of mine bought a house and I moved in with him to help fix it up, polish it, and then maybe sell it. So we are in the backyard pulling weeds and cutting down vines, and I see this 4-inch diameter vine with fuzzy roots attached to the brick, climbed all the way up the wall. I'm not a particularly country boy, more urban, but my friend had warned me of poison ivy in back of the house. I called him over and he said, "Oh, don't worry, it doesn't grow that big." He was wrong. Less than a week later, I'm covered, up and down both arms, bad enough I look like a third-degree burn victim. It has gotten into my bloodstream and appeared on my legs, back, chest, and even my feet, which all had been covered, of course. I remember my GP looked at me with my shirt off and said in the most nonchalant voice, "Oh, that's not quite the worst I've ever seen," with serious emphasis on the one word. It took me 2 weeks of steroids to even return to work, and another 2 weeks to lose the last of the boils. I spent that time researching poison ivy, and I have to brag, I'm an expert on how to track down and murder that plant. I hate poison ivy. Edit. People are asking me for tips on killing the stuff. Go to your local hardware store and they will sell a container of poison ivy killer. The stuff is good, but if you use it as directed, I can guarantee the stuff will return time and again to haunt you. The vine originates underground, not very deeply though. Dig around, while covered in protective clothing, etc., and find the main trunk of the vine. Drill holes through the vine about half the diameter of the stalk and space them about 3 to 5 feet, 1 to 2 meters, apart. Pour the poison ivy killer directly into the hole. Do not dilute it, just pour it right in. Soak the vine well, maybe 50-100 ml or 1/4, 1 to 2 cup, depending on the size of the vine. This should do the trick. Of course, it will need to be dug up and out, but it ought to be pretty dead within a week. If that doesn't do it, repeat the process a second time. Also, do this when there is no rain forecasted. Good luck and kill it dead. Edit 2. Also, it seems everyone either has a story about getting it all over and hating it, "I'm so sorry for you," or telling how they are immune to it. Fun fact about that, allergies change. You can be immune all your life and then one morning wake up allergic to just about anything. Funny story to illustrate this. I told someone about my poison ivy situation once, and she told me about her little brother, who was apparently not allergic. He would play pranks by grabbing it and rubbing it all over himself to try to convince other people that it wasn't poison ivy. He pulled the prank one day and had a wedding to attend 2 days later. He suddenly developed the allergy under the suit. Moral of the story, kill the plant when you find it. Evil, evil little bastard. Edit 3. Last tip I just remembered. If you go out in the woods and suspect you are going to encounter poison ivy, etc. at all, bring a can of spray deodorant with you. The aluminum chloride, I think that's the chemical, in it will neutralize the oil and prevent allergic attack. Otherwise, scrub with soap and water within 10-15 minutes after exposure. Story 4 from user Gullix. Ooh, me, I have a story. I've been an RN for 12 years now, seen a lot of trash. I was particularly lucky in nursing school and got to watch open heart surgery, joint replacement, kidney removal, all kinds of neat stuff right over the surgeon's shoulder. The only one that ever gave me a problem was this kid about 10 years old getting his tonsils removed. The doc had this hooked knife, he's reach into the kid's mouth, hook the tonsil, and yank it back to cut it out. Blood flying out of the unconscious kid's mouth. So I'm standing there, I look up, and all of a sudden, everything's getting sparkly. I just said, I need to leave, right now. Surgeon takes his tools out of the kid's mouth and says, okay, someone please walk him out, thanks. So I learned that for some reason, I get queasy when it's kids being hurt. Which is funny, because I was a pediatrics nurse for quite a while after school. Anyway, the actual story. I wasn't even at work, but maybe 4 years ago, was living with my girlfriend at the time and her 3 young boys. That day, the youngest, about 7, had been climbing up a big lilac bush in the yard that I'd trimmed the day before. He slipped and fell out. A sharp, cut branch caught him in the face on his way down. I was in the kitchen and heard this blood-curdling scream and ran outside. I brought him in, sat him on the kitchen table, and took a look. It seemed like he was pretty lucky. There was just a deep cut on the bottom of his nose. Well, it was bleeding pretty decently, so his mother and I took him to the emergency room. We get there. There's only a physician's assistant on duty. He takes a look and thinks maybe it could use a couple of stitches. Or he says he could call the on-call ENT surgeon for another opinion. We told him that, all due respect, we would like to have a surgeon take a look, just in case. Good thing we did. The boy had nearly taken his entire nose off his face. The stick cut up under the nose and traveled along under the flesh up to the bridge. The entire nose was hanging by a ½ inch of skin at the top. We just hadn't moved it much. As soon as the surgeon came in and pulled this little boy's nose off his face, while he's laying on the exam table screaming absolute bloody murder, suddenly I got really hot. Things start getting hazy. I realize I'm about to pass out. So I quickly exited the room and sat down at the exact same time as my girlfriend, who was also a nurse. Neither of us could take it. Story 5 from user Jojack. Intake on a homeless man. We had to soak his clothes off of him because they were fused to his skin. We didn't know what was wrong. His skin was beyond disgusting, beyond a hygiene issue. As we were cleaning him, we saw thousands of black dots coming from his pile of clothes. Body lice. Thousands of body lice. His skin condition was a lice infestation. They had destroyed the first few layers of skin all over his body. There were open infected wounds, patches of neurotic tissue, and flakes 2 or 3 across falling of. I can't describe the smell. He sat and silently sobbed, repeating how sorry he was as we cleaned him up. We told him it was okay. We do this all the time. He was ashamed of himself, of how low he had let himself get so low, and how he was a burden, but not in a whiny, poor me way. He was sincere and genuinely grateful, but devastated, in absolute despair. We said we had people like him who came in and turned their life around, that it was never too late, that it's more common than most people realize. By the end of the shift, he was settling in and happy. It was a total lie. I had never been through an admission like that before. It took everything in me to not gag or scream. I'd never seen that many insects in my life, let alone flesh-destroying ones. I was itchy for weeks. I could still smell him after I showered. It took every bit of composure I had to stay calm and act like it was all in a day's work. I knew it was probably too late for him. If he survived the infection and his skin actually healed, he was a severe alcoholic. Within 2 hours of him arriving, he was going into DTs, tremors, and seizures. He was an old man and had lived a hard life. He wasn't going to turn his life around. It was too late. He wasn't going to leave. He was going to die there. He had no family, no one to care for him, and a history of mental illness. I was right. He never did get to leave, but he had a pretty good life from then on, though. His skin actually healed incredibly well, but years of alcoholism had taken its toll. He made friends, he had a warm bed to sleep in every night, and never went hungry again. He died happy. Thanks to everyone who was here today. I hope you liked the new video format, and don't forget to write in the comments about it. I love you all. Bye-bye.